The first 48 hours after a layoff quietly decide whether it becomes a 2-month setback or a 2-year spiral. Not the job search, not the resume, not the networking, but the first 2 days before most people even stop shaking. Because a layoff is not really a career event when it first lands. It is a financial emergency, and emergencies have protocols. When a patient rolls into an emergency room, the doctors do not treat everything at once. They triage. Stop the bleeding first, stabilize the vitals second, and worry about the long recovery only after the patient survives the night. The first 48 hours after a layoff work exactly the same way. And almost nobody in America is ever taught the protocol. So this is that protocol, hour by hour, told through one very ordinary Tuesday that millions of Americans will recognize. It starts at 9:15 in the morning when a 34-year-old project manager named David gets a calendar invite with no description. The meeting has 2 attendees, his boss and someone from Human Resources. And every working American knows exactly what that combination means. 11 minutes later, David is holding a severance packet. His laptop is remotely locked, and his badge no longer opens the door. 7 years of work ended before his coffee even got cold. Now here is where the first 48 hours begin. And here is where most people make their first expensive mistake. The instinct in that HR meeting is to sign everything immediately, shake hands, and escape the building with a little dignity intact. But nothing in that severance packet legally requires a signature on the spot. And in most cases, workers over 40 get at least 21 days to review it. Therefore, the first rule of hour 1 is brutally simple. Take the packet, say thank you, and sign absolutely nothing until every page has been read at home with a clear head. While still in that meeting, David needs exactly 4 answers written down because email access usually dies within the hour. When is the last official day of employment? When does health insurance actually end? What happens to unused vacation days? And when does the final paycheck arrive? Those 4 dates are the vital signs of this entire emergency, and everything in the next 2 days gets scheduled around them. One more thing before leaving the parking lot, and it feels almost silly, but it matters enormously. David forwards himself nothing from the company laptop, because that can violate policy. But he does write down the names and personal numbers of 3 coworkers who would vouch for him. References evaporate fast when a whole team gets scattered, so they get captured while the relationships are still warm. Then he drives home, and the shock hits. And this is the part nobody puts in the financial articles. The hands on the steering wheel do not feel like his hands. That numbness is normal, it is human, and the protocol actually plans for it, which is exactly why the next step is boring paperwork instead of big decisions. Because it turns out the single most valuable thing an American can do on layoff day is also the least dramatic one. File for unemployment before going to sleep that first night. Not next week after the severance is sorted, not after a few days of processing the emotions, but day 1, within hours. Here is why the clock matters so much. And this catches millions of people completely off guard. Unemployment benefits do not backdate to the day of the layoff. They generally start from the week the claim is filed. Therefore, every week spent grieving before filing is a week of money that simply never existed, gone forever, no appeals. On top of that, many states still impose an unpaid waiting week before the first dollar arrives, and processing itself can take 2 to 3 weeks. So a person who waits a month to file might not see their first deposit for 6 or 7 weeks, right when the pressure peaks. David files online that evening in about 40 minutes, using his driver's license, his social security number, and his employment dates. And one more critical point, because pride ruins more claims than paperwork ever does. Severance does not automatically disqualify anyone from unemployment. And being laid off through no fault of their own is precisely what the system was built for. American workers fund these benefits through years of payroll taxes on their behalf, which means filing is not charity, it is collecting on an insurance policy they already paid for. By 10 that night, day 1 is done, and the single most time-sensitive wound has been treated. But day 2 opens with the decision that scares people the most, and for good reason: health insurance. For most Americans, coverage does not vanish the moment the badge stops working. It usually runs through the end of the month. After that, there are two main doors, and picking the wrong one can cost a family thousands of dollars in a single season. Door number one is COBRA, which lets a laid-off worker keep the exact same employer plan, same doctors, same deductible progress, everything. The catch is the price tag, because the employer stops paying their share and the full premium plus a 2% fee lands on the worker. That often means somewhere between $500 and $2,000 a month for the same coverage that used to quietly cost a fraction of that. Door number two is the ACA Marketplace at healthcare.gov, where losing job-based coverage opens a special 60-day enrollment window. And here is the twist that flips the whole decision for most laid-off Americans. Marketplace subsidies are based on income, and a household income that just fell off a cliff often qualifies for dramatically cheaper plans, sometimes under $100 a month. But the real genius move, the one almost nobody knows, is that these two doors can be combined into a free safety net. COBRA comes with a 60-day election window, and if it gets elected within that window, the coverage applies retroactively all the way back to the day the old insurance ended. Therefore, a healthy person can enroll in a marketplace plan for the road ahead while keeping COBRA in their back pocket as an emergency parachute during that window. If disaster strikes in those first weeks, COBRA can still be triggered backwards to cover it. And if nothing happens, that giant premium never gets paid. David marks the 60-day deadline on his calendar in red, compares marketplace quotes over breakfast, and just like that, the second vital sign is stable. Now comes the part of day two that feels like surgery, because it involves a knife. The spending audit. At noon, David prints 3 months of bank and credit card statements, grabs a highlighter, and hunts for everything that charges automatically. The streaming stack gets cut to one service. The meal kits get paused. The premium gym becomes the $15 gym. And the subscriptions he forgot existed get deleted with genuine astonishment. For the average American household, that single hour of highlighting frees up $200 to $400 a month without touching a single essential. Then the remaining bills get sorted into a strict hierarchy, because in triage, not all bleeding is equal. Housing first, then utilities, then food, then transportation and insurance, and everything else lines up behind them. And before the credit card minimums even come due, David makes the calls that most people are too embarrassed to make. He calls the card company, the auto lender, and the internet provider, says the words "laid off" out loud, and asks about hardship programs. These programs are real, they are standard, and lenders would much rather pause or shrink a payment than chase a default. But asking early is everything, because hardship options exist for people who call before missing payments, not after. By mid-afternoon on day two, the outflow of cash has been cut by nearly a third, and not $1 of it came from anything that actually matters. With the bleeding slowed, David finally opens the severance packet he wisely refused to sign in that airless conference room. And this is where patience starts paying actual dollars, because severance packets are written by lawyers, but they are rarely final. The packet offers 8 weeks of pay in exchange for a signature waiving all legal claims, which is a trade, not a gift. Therefore, it can be negotiated politely and in writing, especially the parts that cost the company almost nothing to improve. More weeks of pay, a few months of covered COBRA premiums, an agreed neutral reference, and the removal of any non-compete language are all fair asks. The worst realistic outcome of asking is hearing the word no. And the best outcome is thousands of extra dollars of runway. While reading, David also checks 2 smaller treasures that laid-off Americans forget constantly. First, unused vacation days, because a long list of states legally requires that unused PTO gets paid out in cash with the final paycheck. Second, the health savings account, because unlike the insurance plan attached to it, every dollar in an HSA belongs to the worker forever and leaves with them. Those 2 line items alone can quietly add a full month of groceries and gas to the survival fund. Then comes the last exercise of the afternoon, the one that transforms fear into arithmetic, the runway calculation. David adds up every dollar he can actually reach: the checking account, the savings, the severance, the PTO payout, and the estimated unemployment benefit. Then he divides that total by his newly slashed monthly expenses. And the answer that comes back is not a feeling, It is a number. 7 months. 7 months of runway, written on a sticky note, stuck to the refrigerator where the panic used to live. Because a brain that knows it has 7 months makes calm decisions. But a brain staring into fog makes desperate ones. And desperate is exactly the state of mind that leads to the final trap. The one carved in stone. The one that separates a rough year from a ruined decade. There is one account David must never touch, no matter how scary the math gets. The 401k. When the severance feels thin and the fear gets loud, that retirement balance starts whispering like found money. And every year, millions of laid-off Americans listen. They cash out, and the damage is staggering in ways the withdrawal screen never shows. Cashing out before age 59 and a half triggers a 10% federal penalty, plus ordinary income taxes on every single dollar. Therefore, a $20,000 withdrawal can shrink to $13,000 or $14,000 after taxes and penalties, an instant 30% loss for pressing a button. But the visible loss is the small loss. That same $20,000, left invested for 25 more years at historical market averages, could have grown well past $100,000. Cashing out a 401k during a layoff is essentially selling a future six-figure asset to solve a four-figure problem. The correct moves are quiet ones. Either leave the money where it sits, or roll it directly into an IRA so it keeps compounding untouched. The same protection extends to the emergency fund strategy, because order matters, even when savings must be spent. Cash savings get used first, then expenses get cut deeper, and retirement money stays sealed behind glass marked break only for actual survival. By 8 o'clock on night 2, David sits at his kitchen table with a one-page battle plan where the panic used to be. Unemployment claim filed and confirmed. Health coverage mapped, with the 60-day parachute noted in red. Spending cut by a third. Lenders called. Hierarchy set. Retirement fully intact. Still compounding, still his. The layoff is still real, and the job search ahead is still hard. But the emergency is over, because the patient is stable. And here is the truth hiding inside this whole story. The part worth remembering long before any calendar invite ever appears. Nobody can control when a layoff happens. And in this economy, tenure and talent and loyalty protect absolutely no one. But everyone gets to control what happens next. And next has a deadline. Because the first 48 hours after a layoff quietly decide whether it becomes a 2-month setback or a 2-year spiral. And now, the protocol is no longer a secret.